At the family dinner, my son-in-law shoved me and shouted, pointing his finger, "Stay away from my family, you're a monster." The police immediately arrested me. But at my trial, what the judge discovered about my son-in-law made the entire courtroom go pale. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought a family dinner could destroy a man's entire life. But that's exactly what happened on a cold Thursday evening in November, when my son-in-law, Fred, turned my world upside down with a single accusation that would haunt me for months to come. The evening started like any other family gathering at Sarah's house. I had brought Emma, my 7-year-old granddaughter, a small stuffed elephant from the toy store, and little Michael got a set of building blocks. At 65, these moments with my grandchildren had become the highlight of my weeks, especially since losing my wife Margaret 2 years ago. Sarah had been encouraging these visits, saying the kids needed their grandfather's presence more than ever. Fred was unusually quiet during dinner, which I should have noticed as a warning sign. Normally, he dominated conversations with stories about his real estate deals or complaints about his clients. But that night, he just sat there, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When Emma spilled juice on her dress, I instinctively reached for a napkin to help clean it up. That's when everything exploded. "Don't you dare touch her!" Fred's voice boomed across the dining room, so loud that little Michael started crying. "Get your hands away from my daughter!" I froze, the napkin still in my hand, completely bewildered. "Fred, I was just helping her clean up the—" "I saw what you were doing," he snarled, standing up so abruptly that his chair toppled backward. "I've been watching you, old man. The way you look at them, the way you always want to help them with baths and changing clothes." Sarah's face went white as paper. "Fred, what are you talking about?" But Fred wasn't done. He pointed his finger directly at my face, his voice rising to a shout that could probably be heard by the neighbors. "This sick monster has been touching my children inappropriately. I've seen enough." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been punched in the stomach. "Fred, that's insane. I would never." "Liar." He shoved me hard, and at my age I stumbled backward, nearly falling over the coffee table. "Stay away from my family. You're a monster." Emma was crying now, confused and terrified by her father's rage. Michael had run to hide behind the couch. Sarah stood there frozen, her eyes darting between her husband and her father, clearly trying to process what was happening. "I'm calling the police," Fred announced, already pulling out his phone. "This ends tonight." "Fred, please," Sarah finally found her voice. "Dad would never hurt the children, you know that." But Fred's expression was cold, determined. "I know what I've seen, Sarah. He's been grooming them for months. All those offers to help with bath time, insisting on putting Emma to bed, wanting to take them on overnight trips. Open your eyes." Each accusation felt like another nail in my coffin. Yes, I had offered to help with bath time when Emma had that accident at the park and was covered in mud. Yes, I enjoyed reading bedtime stories to them. And yes, I had suggested taking them camping like I used to do with Sarah when she was little. But Fred was twisting every innocent moment into something sinister. "You're sick," I managed to whisper, my voice shaking with a combination of rage and terror. "These are my grandchildren. I love them." "That's exactly the problem," Fred shot back. "Your kind of love is dangerous." The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers, one older and stern-faced, the other younger and clearly uncomfortable with the domestic situation. Fred met them at the door, immediately launching into his accusations with the confidence of a man who believed every word he was saying. "Officers, thank God you're here. This man has been sexually abusing my children." I felt the world tilt sideways. The older officer looked at me with instant suspicion, while the younger one began taking notes. Sarah was sobbing now, still trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside," the older officer said to me, his hand resting on his handcuffs. "This is insane," I protested, but my voice sounded weak, defeated. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm their grandfather." "Dad?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. She looked at me with confusion and something that might have been doubt. That look destroyed me more than Fred's accusations ever could. As they placed the handcuffs on my wrists, I caught a glimpse of Fred's face. For just a second, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't anger or righteous indignation. It was satisfaction. Cold, calculated satisfaction. The ride to the police station was a blur of flashing lights and radio chatter. I kept thinking this was all a terrible mistake, that Sarah would call and tell them Fred had lost his mind, that she knew her father would never hurt anyone, but that call never came. At the station, they took my fingerprints, my photograph, and my belt. They put me in a small, cold room that smelled like disinfectant and fear. A detective with tired eyes and coffee breath asked me the same questions over and over again. Have you ever touched Emma or Michael inappropriately? No. Have you ever been alone with them in compromising situations? I've babysat them, if that's what you mean, with Sarah's permission. Have you ever given them gifts to keep secrets? Each question felt like another stone added to the pile that was slowly burying me alive. They read me my rights, but the words sounded like they were coming from underwater. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's nightmare. By morning, I was charged with suspicion of child sexual abuse. The bail was set at $50,000, money I didn't have readily available. More importantly, there was a restraining order preventing me from going anywhere near my grandchildren, or even my own daughter. As I sat in that jail cell, listening to the sounds of other inmates and trying to make sense of what had happened, one thought kept echoing in my mind. Why would Fred do this to me? What did he have to gain by destroying an old man's life? I had no idea that this was just the beginning, and that the truth about my son-in-law would prove to be far more twisted than I could have ever imagined. The county jail was a special kind of hell for someone accused of what I was accused of. Word travels fast in a place like that, and by my second day, every inmate knew exactly why I was there. Child predators, they told me with sneers and threats, were the lowest form of life behind bars. I spent most of my time in protective custody, which meant 23 hours a day in a cell barely larger than my bathroom at home. The 1 hour of recreation time was worse than solitary confinement. Other inmates would spit when I walked by, mutter threats under their breath, or simply stare at me with the kind of hatred usually reserved for the devil himself. "You're lucky you're in PC, old man," one particularly large prisoner called out during my third day. "Out here in general population, we know how to handle baby touchers." I wanted to scream that I was innocent, that I'd never hurt a child in my life, but I'd learned quickly that protests only made things worse. Instead, I kept my head down and tried to survive each day, counting the hours until I could somehow prove my innocence. My court-appointed attorney was a young man named Danny Rodriguez, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. During our first meeting, he sat across from me in the visiting room with a file folder that seemed too thin for a case that had destroyed my entire life. "Mr. Patterson," he said without much enthusiasm, "I'm going to be honest with you. These cases are difficult to defend. The prosecution has witness testimony from your son-in-law, and they're saying there may be more evidence coming." "What kind of evidence?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Danny consulted his notes. "They found some photos on your phone. Pictures of the children at bath time, apparently." My heart sank. Those photos were from when Emma had gotten into poison ivy during a camping trip last summer. Sarah had asked me to document the rash so she could show the doctor. But I could see how those innocent images might look to someone determined to see evil where none existed. "Those pictures are completely innocent," I explained. "Sarah asked me to take them for medical reasons." Danny nodded absently, already looking like he didn't believe me. "We'll need to prepare a defense strategy. Have you given any thought to pleading down to a lesser charge?" "I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do." He sighed. "Mr. Patterson, I understand your position, but sometimes it's better to take a deal than risk a trial. Juries don't like men your age accused of these crimes." After he left, I sat in my cell and tried to call Sarah. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I tried again an hour later, same result. By the end of the week, I realized she wasn't going to answer my calls at all. The isolation was eating me alive. For 2 years since Margaret's death, Sarah and the kids had been my whole world. Now I was cut off from them completely, branded as a monster by the very person who should have been protecting them from real threats. Late at night, when the jail was as quiet as it ever got, I would lie on my thin mattress and try to understand what had happened. Fred had seemed to genuinely love Sarah when they first met 5 years ago. He was attentive, successful in his real estate business, and he'd made Sarah happy after a difficult divorce from her first husband. But thinking back now, I began to remember small things that had bothered me at the time. The way Fred would interrupt conversations between Sarah and me. How he'd suggested that the kids didn't need to visit their grandfather so often because it was confusing for them. The subtle comments about how I was getting old and might not be the best influence. Had he been planning this for months? Years? The worst part was the doubt I could see creeping into everyone's eyes during visiting hours. My brother Jim came to see me once, and though he said he believed in my innocence, I could tell he was questioning everything he thought he knew about me. My neighbor Mrs. Chen, who had been like family since Margaret's death, stopped returning my calls entirely. People don't want to be associated with this kind of scandal, Danny explained matter-of-factly during one of our meetings. It's not personal. But it felt personal. It felt like my entire life was being erased, one relationship at a time. 3 weeks into my imprisonment, I got a letter from Sarah. My hands shook as I opened it, hoping desperately for some sign that she believed in my innocence. Instead, I found 3 sentences that cut deeper than any physical wound. Dad, I need time to process everything that's happened. The children are asking about you, but I don't know what to tell them. Please don't try to contact us while this is being sorted out. No signature, no love, or even her name. Just a cold dismissal from the daughter I'd raised alone after her mother left when Sarah was 12. The daughter I'd worked 3 jobs to put through college. The daughter who used to call me her hero. That night I seriously considered giving up. What was the point of fighting if even my own daughter doubted me? Maybe it would be easier to just plead guilty and serve whatever time they gave me. At least then this nightmare would have an end date. But then I thought about Emma and Michael. If I gave up now, they would grow up believing their grandfather was a monster. They would carry that shame and confusion for the rest of their lives. I couldn't let Fred's lies become their truth. The next morning, I asked for a new attorney. Danny seemed relieved to be off the case, and within a week I had a meeting scheduled with Helena Morrison, a defense attorney who specialized in false accusation cases. "Mr. Patterson," she said during our first meeting, looking directly into my eyes, "I'm going to ask you one question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you ever touch those children inappropriately?" "Never," I said without hesitation. "I would die before I hurt them." She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "Good, because I think we're dealing with something more complicated than a simple misunderstanding here. Your son-in-law's story has some holes in it, and I intend to find every single one." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone would finally listen to the truth. But I had no idea how dark and twisted that truth would turn out to be. Helena Morrison was nothing like Danny Rodriguez. Where he had been timid and defeatist, she was sharp and methodical. In her early 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent years fighting for the wrongly accused. "I've been doing this for 15 years, she told me during our second meeting, spreading out a thick file across the metal table. "And there are patterns to false accusations. Your case has several red flags that make me think we're not dealing with a confused grandfather situation." She pulled out a yellow legal pad covered in neat handwriting. "First, the timing. Why now? You've been babysitting these children for years without incident. What changed 3 weeks ago that suddenly made Fred see you as a threat?" I thought about it. Nothing that I can remember. If anything, I'd been spending less time with them lately because of my arthritis acting up. Exactly. Second red flag, the specificity of his accusations. He had very detailed examples ready to go, as if he'd been collecting them. And third, he called the police immediately instead of confronting you privately first. Most fathers would want to handle something like this within the family initially. Helena had already begun her investigation, and what she was finding made my blood run cold. She'd discovered that Fred had been in a similar situation before, with his previous wife's father. His first wife was named Jennifer, Helena explained, consulting her notes. She had a daughter from a previous relationship, and Fred accused Jennifer's father of inappropriate behavior with the child. The accusations were eventually dropped, but not before they destroyed the family relationships. My stomach churned. "Are you saying he's done this before?" "I'm saying there's a pattern here that's worth investigating. I've reached out to Jennifer, and she's agreed to speak with us. She lives in Oregon now, remarried with a different last name." The interview with Jennifer took place over video call the following week. She was a small woman with tired eyes who seemed nervous about speaking, but determined to tell her story. "Fred was charming at first, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But he gradually became more controlling. He didn't like my daughter having a relationship with my parents, especially my father. He would make little comments about how it wasn't healthy for her to be so attached to her grandfather. Helena leaned forward. When did the accusations start? About 6 months after we got married. Dad had taken Katie to the park and she came home with a skinned knee. Fred became convinced that something inappropriate had happened during the trip. He started questioning Katie, leading her with suggestions about what might have occurred. I felt sick listening to this. What happened to your father? Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. He was devastated. My mother blamed him for putting the family through the scandal, even though no charges were ever filed. They divorced a year later. Dad died alone 3 years ago, still carrying the shame of those accusations. After the call ended, Helena sat quietly for several minutes, making notes. Finally, she looked up at me. We need to talk to your neighbors. I want to know if anyone has observed Fred's behavior with the children, and whether there have been any incidents that didn't involve you. The neighborhood canvass began the next day. Helena worked methodically, going door to door and asking careful questions about Fred's interactions with Emma and Michael. What she discovered painted a disturbing picture. Mrs. Chen, my next-door neighbor, finally agreed to speak after Helena assured her that her statement could help prove my innocence. I never liked that man, she confided, glancing around nervously, as if Fred might appear at any moment. He's very controlling with Sarah, and with the children. There's something not right. What do you mean? Helena asked. Last month I saw him outside with little Emma. She was playing in the yard and he kept calling her over to him. When she didn't come immediately, he grabbed her arm very roughly. She started crying, and he shook her, telling her she needed to obey him immediately when he called. Helena made careful notes. Did you see anyone else witness this? The mailman was there, Bob Stevens. He looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. Bob Stevens confirmed Mrs. Chen's account when Helena tracked him down. It bothered me, he admitted. The little girl looked scared of him. But you don't interfere in family matters, you know. I wish I had said something now. More neighbors came forward with similar observations. Fred had been seen losing his temper with the children on multiple occasions. One neighbor reported seeing him force Michael to eat something that made the boy vomit, then punish him for being sick. The strange thing, Mrs. Patterson from 3 houses down told Helena, is that the children always seemed happier when Thomas was around. Fred would get agitated whenever Thomas's car pulled up in the driveway. Helena also discovered something that made my heart race with hope. She'd obtained Fred's phone records and found that he had been researching child abuse accusations online for months before confronting me. His search history included phrases like signs of child predator behavior and how to report suspected abuse. He was building a case, Helena explained. This wasn't a spontaneous reaction to something he witnessed. This was planned. But the most shocking discovery came when Helena interviewed Emma's teacher at school, Miss Rodriguez had been teaching first grade for over 20 years and had developed a keen eye for children in distress. Emma had been acting differently for several weeks before all this happened, she told Helena in confidence. She seemed anxious, more clingy than usual. She started having accidents, which was unusual for her. Did she say anything about her grandfather? Helena asked carefully. No, never. But she did say something strange about her daddy. She told me he had new rules about bath time and bedtime and that she didn't like the new rules. When I asked her what the rules were, she clammed up and said she wasn't supposed to talk about them. Helena's expression grew grim. Did you report this? I made a note in her file, but before I could investigate further, the accusations against her grandfather came out. Everyone assumed that explained her behavioral changes. As Helena compiled her evidence, a disturbing picture emerged. Fred had been manipulating situations for months, creating scenarios that could later be misinterpreted as suspicious behavior on my part. The bath time photos on my phone. He had been the one to suggest I document Emma's poison ivy rash. The overnight camping trips he'd mentioned to police. He had actually encouraged those trips, saying the children needed more time with their grandfather. He set you up, Helena said bluntly during one of our meetings. Every piece of evidence he presented to police was something he either suggested or orchestrated himself. But why? I asked, though part of me was beginning to understand. Control, Helena replied. With you out of the picture, he has complete authority over Sarah and the children. No more grandfather undermining his parenting decisions or giving Sarah someone to turn to for support. The most heartbreaking revelation came when Helena managed to speak with Sarah's sister, Linda, who lived in California. Linda had been cut off from the family 6 months earlier after what Fred described as disrespectful behavior. "He's been isolating Sarah systematically," Linda told Helena over the phone. "First it was her friends from college. Then it was Dad. I was next on his list. He told Sarah I was a bad influence and that the children didn't need to be around my lifestyle." "What lifestyle?" Helena asked. "I'm a single mother who works 2 jobs. Apparently that made me an unsuitable role model for Emma and Michael." Linda also revealed something that made Helena's investigation take on new urgency. "Sarah tried to call me last week," she said. "She sounded scared. She said she was starting to have doubts about what happened with Dad, but that Fred was watching her phone calls now. She hung up when she heard him coming home." Helena hung up the phone and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was determination mixed with something that looked like fear. "We need to move fast," she said. "If Sarah is starting to question Fred's story, he's going to escalate his control tactics, and based on what I've learned about his history, that could put her and the children in real danger." I felt a chill run down my spine. In trying to destroy me, Fred had revealed himself to be something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined, and my daughter and grandchildren were trapped alone with him, with no one left to protect them. The race to expose the truth had suddenly become a race to save their lives. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Helena had been working with a private investigator named Marcus Chen, Mrs. Chen's nephew, who specialized in digital forensics. What he found on Fred's devices would change everything. "Your son-in-law is sloppy with his digital security," Marcus explained during our meeting in Helena's office. "He uses the same password for everything, and he never clears his browser history properly." Marcus had legally obtained access to Fred's laptop through a court order, based on Helena's evidence of a pattern of false accusations. What they discovered was a methodical campaign of manipulation that had been going on for over a year. "He's been intercepting Sarah's communications," Marcus continued, showing us printed screenshots. "He installed monitoring software on her phone and computer that he could access remotely. Every text message, every email, every phone call. He's been watching it all." My hands shook as I looked at the evidence. Fred had been reading Sarah's private conversations with her friends, monitoring her internet searches, even tracking her location throughout the day. But most disturbing were the conversations he had blocked or deleted before Sarah could see them. "Look at this," Helena said, pointing to a series of missed calls and messages from me that had been automatically deleted from Sarah's phone. "You tried to reach out to her dozens of times after the accusations. She never saw any of it because Fred had programmed her phone to filter out anything from your number." There were also deleted messages from Linda, from old college friends, and from a counselor Sarah had apparently tried to contact. Fred had been systematically cutting off every avenue of support she might have turned to, but the most damning evidence was Fred's own communication history. He had been corresponding with someone named Rick Morrison for months, discussing what he called the grandfather problem. Helena read from the printed emails. "The old man has too much influence over Sarah and the kids. Need to find a way to eliminate him permanently. Can't have him undermining my authority in my own house." "Who is Rick Morrison?" I asked. "His brother," Helena replied grimly, "and it gets worse." The emails revealed that Fred and Rick had discussed various strategies for getting rid of me, including trying to prove I was mentally incompetent and having me committed to a nursing home. When those plans seemed too complicated, they had settled on the sexual abuse accusations as the most effective way to ensure I would never be allowed near the family again. "This email is from 2 weeks before the dinner incident," Helena continued reading. Fred writes, "Going to execute the plan this Thursday. Have been setting up the situations for months. Photos are on his phone. Witnesses will be present, and I've prepared Sarah to be suspicious of his behavior. This will end it permanently." I felt physically ill. The man I had welcomed into my family, the father of my grandchildren, had spent months plotting to destroy my life with cold, calculated precision. Marcus had also uncovered evidence that Fred had been coaching the children, though not in the way we initially feared. Instead of putting inappropriate ideas in their heads, he had been teaching them to be afraid of physical affection from me. "There are voice recordings on his phone," Marcus explained. "Listen to this." He played a recording of Fred talking to Emma. "Remember, sweetheart, grandfathers shouldn't help you with private things like getting dressed or taking baths. That's for mommies and daddies only. If Grandpa ever tries to help you with those things again, you need to tell Daddy immediately." Emma's small voice responded, "But Grandpa only helped me when I had the itchy rash and Mommy said it was okay. Fred's voice became firmer. Adults sometimes make mistakes, Emma. You need to trust Daddy to keep you safe. Can you do that for me? Okay, Daddy. Helena stopped the recording, her face pale with anger. He wasn't accusing you of abuse. He was manufacturing the appearance of abuse by teaching the children to report normal grandfather behavior as suspicious. As devastating as this evidence was, it also gave us the ammunition we needed to fight back. But Helena warned me that Fred wasn't going to go down easily. Men like this escalate when they feel cornered, she said. If he realizes we're onto him, he might become dangerous. We need to move carefully. That careful approach became critical when Sarah finally attempted to visit me in jail. It was the first time I'd seen my daughter in over 2 months, and the change in her appearance shocked me. She looked exhausted, almost hollow, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy that reminded me of a trapped animal. Dad, she said quietly, sitting across from me at the visiting room table. I've been thinking about what happened, and some things don't make sense. I wanted to reach across and hug her, but the glass partition and the guards made that impossible. What kind of things? Fred said you took inappropriate pictures of the kids, but I remember asking you to take those photos of Emma's rash. And he said you were always trying to get them alone, but you usually included me in everything. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, and she kept glancing around as if she was afraid someone might overhear. He's been acting strange since you were arrested. More controlling. He monitors my phone calls now, says it's for our protection, but it feels wrong. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, leaning forward. Fred has been planning this for a long time. He's been manipulating situations to make me look suspicious. Her eyes filled with tears. I know something's not right, but I don't know what to believe anymore. The children ask about you every day, and when I tell them you're sick, Fred gets angry and says I shouldn't mention you at all. What else has changed since I've been gone? I asked gently. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then spoke so softly I had to strain to hear her. He's different with the kids, more harsh. Emma wet her bed last week, and he made her wash the sheets herself and sleep on the floor as punishment. She's 7 years old, Dad. My heart broke for my granddaughter. Sarah, you need to know that my lawyer has found evidence that Fred has done this before, with his first wife's family. This is a pattern for him. I can't talk much longer, Sarah said, glancing at the clock. He tracks my location now. He'll want to know why I was gone so long. Before you go, I need you to do something for me. Can you check your phone for messages from me over the past 2 months? Look in your spam folder, your blocked messages, anywhere they might have been hidden. Sarah nodded, confusion evident on her face. Why would they be hidden? Just check, sweetheart. And Sarah, be careful. If you find anything that makes you suspicious, don't confront Fred directly. Call my lawyer, Helena Morrison. Can you remember that name? Helena Morrison, she repeated. Dad, I'm scared. I know, baby girl, but we're going to fix this. I promise. After Sarah left, I sat in my cell feeling a mixture of hope and terror. Hope because my daughter was finally starting to see through Fred's manipulation. Terror because I knew that if Fred realized she was questioning him, he would take drastic action to maintain control. That night, Helena called with an update that confirmed my worst fears. Sarah contacted me an hour ago, she said. She found the blocked messages on her phone, including dozens from you that she never saw. She also found evidence that Fred has been reading her private emails for months. How did she sound? Scared but determined. She wants to help build the case against him. But she's terrified about what he might do if he finds out she's working with us. Helena paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Thomas, there's something else. Sarah told me that Fred has been talking about moving the family out of state. He's been pressuring her to agree to a job transfer that would take them to North Carolina, far away from anyone who knows their history here. My blood ran cold. If Fred succeeded in isolating Sarah and the children completely, they might disappear from my life forever. Even if I was eventually vindicated, I might never see my grandchildren again. We have to stop him, I said. We're going to, Helena replied. But first we need to make sure Sarah and the children are safe. Because if Fred realizes his plan is falling apart, there's no telling how far he'll go to maintain control. As I hung up the phone, I realized that this nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was about to get much worse before it got better. But for the first time since that terrible dinner, I had something I hadn't dared to hope for. My daughter was on my side again. Now we just had to survive whatever Fred had planned next. The trial began on a gray Monday morning in March, nearly 5 months after that devastating dinner. As I sat at the defendant's table next to Helena, I could feel the weight of every eye in the courtroom. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Janet Mitchell, had painted me as a predator who had used my position as a grandfather to gain access to innocent children, but Helena was ready for her. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Helena began her opening statement, "you're going to hear a story today about manipulation, false accusations, and a man's systematic campaign to destroy an innocent person's life. But that man isn't sitting at the defendant's table. He's sitting right there in the gallery, and his name is Fred Carlson." Fred shifted uncomfortably in his seat behind the prosecutor's table. Sarah sat beside him, but I noticed she wasn't holding his hand like she would have months ago. She looked straight ahead, her face carefully neutral. The prosecution's case was exactly what we expected. Fred took the stand first, presenting himself as a concerned father who had noticed troubling signs and had the courage to speak up for his children's safety. "I started noticing patterns," Fred testified, his voice steady and convincing. "Thomas would always volunteer to help with bath time. He insisted on putting the children to bed personally. He took pictures of them in various states of undress, claiming it was for innocent reasons." Helena let him talk, taking careful notes. During cross-examination, she began to dismantle his story piece by piece. "Mr. Carlson, you mentioned that my client took inappropriate photographs. Are you aware that you specifically asked him to document Emma's poison ivy rash for medical purposes?" Fred hesitated. I may have suggested documenting the rash, but not in the way he did it." "How exactly did he do it wrong?" He took more pictures than necessary." Helena pulled out medical records. "According to Emma's pediatrician, the number of photos was entirely appropriate for tracking the progression of a severe allergic reaction. Were you present when these photos were taken?" "No, but..." "So you have no first-hand knowledge of how these photos were taken or the context in which they were captured?" "No, but the photos speak for themselves." Helena moved to her next point. "You testified that my client always volunteered for bath time duties. Is it true that on the specific occasion you're referencing, Emma had fallen into a muddy creek during a family outing, and you specifically asked Thomas to help clean her up because you had to deal with Michael's meltdown?" Fred's confident demeanor began to crack. "I don't remember the specific circumstances. Let me refresh your memory." Helena produced photographs from the family outing. "This is Emma covered in mud from head to toe. This is Michael having what appears to be a tantrum in the background. And here's a text message you sent to your wife that day." She read from her notes. "Thank God your dad is here to help with Emma. Michael is losing it, and I can't handle both kids right now." The jury was paying close attention now. Fred's face had gone pale. "Mr. Carlson, is it fair to say that you not only approved of my client's help that day, but that you were grateful for it?" "That was before I understood the pattern of behavior." "What pattern?" "The pattern of helping your family when you specifically asked for help." The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. Helena had established that Fred's accusations were based on situations he had either requested or approved of at the time. But the real bombshell came when Helena called Jennifer Walsh to the stand. Fred's ex-wife took the oath with steady hands, but I could see the pain in her eyes as she prepared to relive her nightmare. "Mrs. Walsh, you were married to the defendant's son-in-law, Fred Carlson, from 2018 to 2020, is that correct?" "Yes." "During that marriage, did Mr. Carlson make accusations against your father regarding inappropriate behavior with your daughter, Katie?" "Yes, he did." Helena walked Jennifer through the entire story, from Fred's initial comments about her father being too involved with Katie, to his escalating accusations, to the eventual destruction of her family relationships. "Were these accusations ever substantiated?" "No. Police investigated and found no evidence, but by then the damage was done. My father was humiliated. My mother blamed him for bringing scandal to the family, and they divorced." "What happened to your father?" Jennifer's voice broke slightly. "He became depressed and isolated. He died 3 years later, still carrying the shame of accusations that were never proven." The courtroom was silent. I could see several jurors looking at Fred with newfound suspicion. "Mrs. Walsh, looking back now, do you believe Mr. Carlson's accusations against your father were legitimate?" "No, I don't. I think Fred couldn't stand that Katie loved her grandfather more than she loved him. He wanted to be the only important man in our lives." During cross-examination, the prosecutor tried to discredit Jennifer's testimony, suggesting she was bitter about her divorce and willing to lie to get revenge. But Jennifer remained calm and consistent. The next witness was Marcus Chen, the digital forensic investigator. Helena had him walk the jury through Fred's electronic surveillance of Sarah, his deleted messages, and most damning of all, the emails with his brother planning my downfall. These emails span a period of 8 months, Marcus testified. They show a systematic plan to manipulate situations and create false evidence against Mr. Patterson. Helena had Marcus read Fred's own words to the jury. Need to eliminate the grandfather permanently. Can't have him undermining my authority. The abuse angle will work best because no one questions a father protecting his children. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge called for order, but I could see the shock on the jurors' faces. When the prosecutor tried to suggest that the emails might have been fabricated, Marcus calmly explained the digital forensics process and how impossible it would be to fake metadata and server records. But the most powerful witness was Sarah herself. She had lost weight since I'd last seen her, and there was a strength in her bearing that reminded me of her mother. As she took the stand, Fred leaned forward in his seat, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. "Sarah, you're the defendant's daughter, is that correct?" "Yes." "And you're married to Fred Carlson, who made the initial accusations against your father?" "Yes, though we're currently separated." That was news to me. I felt a surge of pride that my daughter had found the courage to leave him. "Can you tell the jury about your relationship with your father before these accusations were made?" Sarah's voice was steady but emotional. "My father was my hero. After my mother left when I was 12, he raised me alone. He worked 3 jobs to put me through college. When I had my children, he was the most loving, gentle grandfather I could have imagined." "Did you ever observe any inappropriate behavior between your father and your children?" "Never. Not once. My father respected boundaries, always asked permission before helping with anything personal, and the children adored him." Helena walked Sarah through the events leading up to that terrible dinner, establishing how Fred had been manipulating situations and gradually turning her against me. "Mrs. Carlson, did you ever ask your father to document Emma's poison ivy rash with photographs?" "Yes, I did. Emma's reaction was severe, and I wanted pictures to show the doctor. I specifically asked my father to take them because I was dealing with Michael at the time." "And the bath time incident your husband referenced?" "Emma had fallen into a creek and was covered in mud and creek water. I was worried about infection. My husband asked my father to help clean her up because Michael was having a meltdown, and we couldn't handle both children." Sarah went on to describe the surveillance she had discovered on her devices, the deleted messages, and her growing realization that Fred had been controlling her communications for months. "When did you first begin to suspect that your husband's accusations might not be true?" "When I found dozens of messages from my father that I had never seen. Messages where he was begging me to let him explain, telling me he loved me and the children. Fred had programmed my phone to delete them automatically." The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal. She suggested that Sarah was an unreliable witness who was turning against her husband to protect a guilty father. But Sarah held firm. "I know my father," she said simply. "He would never hurt a child. But I'm learning that I never really knew my husband at all." When Fred was recalled for further questioning, Helena confronted him with his emails, his surveillance activities, and his history with Jennifer's family. Under pressure, his careful facade began to crumble. "You've been caught in several lies today, Mr. Carlson. Are you lying about the abuse allegations as well?" "I was protecting my children," Fred snapped, his composure finally breaking. "Thomas was undermining my authority, turning them against me. Sarah, too. He had to be stopped." The courtroom went silent. Fred realized too late what he had just admitted. "So you acknowledge that your accusations were motivated by jealousy and control, not by any actual concern for your children's safety?" Fred tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. In his anger, he had revealed his true motivations. Helena's closing argument was devastating. She laid out the evidence methodically, showing how Fred had manipulated, lied, and destroyed lives to maintain control over his family. "Thomas Patterson is guilty of only one thing," she concluded. "Being a loving grandfather whose very existence threatened a controlling man's need for absolute power. Don't let Fred Carlson's lies destroy one more innocent life." As the jury filed out to deliberate, I felt a mixture of hope and terror. The evidence was overwhelming, but I had learned not to trust in justice after months of this nightmare. 3 hours later, the jury returned. Has the jury reached a verdict? "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of child sexual abuse, how do you find?" "Not guilty." The courtroom erupted. I felt my legs give out as the weight of 5 months crashed down on me. Helena grabbed my arm to steady me, tears streaming down her face. But even as relief flooded through me, I could see Fred in the gallery, his face twisted with rage. This wasn't over for him. Men like Fred don't accept defeat gracefully. As court officials led Fred away in handcuffs for perjury and evidence tampering charges, he turned to look at me one last time. The hatred in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. I was free, but the battle for my family was just beginning. The first night of freedom in my own bed felt surreal. After 5 months in a jail cell, the simple luxury of my own pillow and the familiar creaks of my old house seemed like miracles. But even as I lay there, grateful to be home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not the end of the story. Sarah came to see me the next morning, bringing Emma and Michael with her. The moment I opened the door and saw my grandchildren's faces, all the pain of the past months melted away. Emma threw herself into my arms with the uninhibited joy that only children possess. "Grandpa, Daddy said you were sick, but you look fine to me." Michael, now 8 and more cautious than his sister, hung back at first, but when I knelt down to his level and opened my arms, he ran to me too. The feeling of holding them again, of breathing in their little kid smell of shampoo and playground dirt, brought tears to my eyes. "I missed you both so much," I whispered into their hair. Sarah watched from the doorway, her own tears falling freely. "Kids, why don't you go play in Grandpa's backyard for a few minutes? He has something new out there." I had indeed bought a new swing set during my first week of freedom, hoping against hope that this day would come. The children squealed with delight and ran outside, leaving Sarah and me alone for the first time since the nightmare began. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I should have believed in you from the beginning. I should have known that Fred was lying." I pulled my daughter into my arms, holding her tight. "You were being manipulated by someone who had been planning this for months. You couldn't have known. But I'm your daughter. I should have trusted what I knew about you instead of letting him poison my mind." We sat on my old couch, the same one where she used to curl up next to me as a child when she had nightmares. In many ways, we were both waking up from a nightmare now. "Where are you and the kids living now?" I asked. "We moved into an apartment across town last month. The divorce papers were filed yesterday." Sarah's voice was steady, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Fred fought me on everything. Custody, property, even tried to claim I was an unfit mother because I chose a child molester over my own husband." My anger flared. "Is he still spreading those lies?" "His lawyer tried, but Helena shut that down quickly. The court made it clear that his perjury conviction made him an unreliable witness. He gets supervised visitation with the kids every other weekend, but that's it." Through the window, I could see Emma and Michael testing out the new swings, their laughter floating through the glass. Such a normal, beautiful sound after months of silence. "How are they handling everything?" I asked. Sarah sighed. "Better than I expected, honestly. Kids are resilient. Emma keeps asking why Daddy lied about you, and I've been trying to explain it in ways she can understand. Michael is angrier. He's old enough to realize that Fred kept him from seeing you on purpose." Over the following weeks, we slowly rebuilt our routine. Sunday dinners returned, but now they were held at my house instead of Sarah's. The kids would arrive early and spend the day with me, helping in the garden or working on craft projects. Sarah often stayed too, and I watched her gradually relaxing, the constant tension that had defined her during the Fred years finally beginning to ease. The community's response to my vindication was mixed. Most neighbors were apologetic and supportive, understanding that they had been misled by a master manipulator. Mrs. Chen became one of my strongest defenders, often bringing me homemade soup and checking on me daily. But there were others who seemed disappointed that the scandal hadn't been real. Some people, I learned, are invested in believing the worst about others. A few former friends never reached out after my exoneration, apparently more comfortable with their assumptions than with admitting they had been wrong. I decided I didn't need those people in my life anyway. Helena Morrison became more than just my lawyer. She became a friend. She often stopped by to check on me, and we developed a tradition of having coffee together every Friday morning. During one of these visits, she brought news that both pleased and concerned me. "Fred's been transferred to a minimum security facility," she told me. "He'll be eligible for parole in 18 months with good behavior." My stomach tightened. That seems too soon. I agree, but perjury and evidence tampering don't carry the long sentences they should. However, there's something else you should know. Jennifer Walsh, his ex-wife, has started a support group for families affected by false accusations. She wants to invite you to speak at one of their meetings. The idea terrified and intrigued me in equal measure. Talking about what I'd been through was still painful, but if it could help other families avoid the same nightmare, Maybe there was purpose in my suffering. I agreed to attend a meeting and found myself in a church basement with 12 other people whose lives had been shattered by lies. There was a grandmother who had been accused of abuse by her son-in-law, a teacher whose career had been destroyed by a false allegation from a troubled student, and a father who had lost custody of his children after his ex-wife fabricated abuse claims during their divorce. Listening to their stories, I realized how common this type of manipulation was, and how rarely the truth came to light as clearly as it had in my case. Many of these people would never fully recover their reputations or their relationships. "You're one of the lucky ones," Jennifer told me after the meeting. "Not everyone gets a lawyer like Helena or finds evidence as damning as Fred's emails. Most people accused of these things never get their lives back, even when they're innocent." That conversation haunted me for days. I began to understand that my vindication came with a responsibility to speak up for others who weren't as fortunate. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor. Emma had been staying with me for the weekend while Sarah attended a work conference, and we were working in the garden when a car pulled into my driveway. It was Fred's mother, Patricia Carlson, a woman I had met only a few times during family gatherings. She looked older than I remembered, her face drawn with what I recognized as shame. I sent Emma inside to watch cartoons and walked over to meet Patricia by her car. "Thomas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I wanted to apologize for what my son did to you and your family." I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse there. "Mrs. Carlson, you don't need to apologize for Fred's actions." "Yes, I do." Tears welled in her eyes. "I raised him. I saw the signs of his controlling nature when he was young, but I made excuses for it. I told myself he was just strong-willed, that he would grow out of it." She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "These are letters Fred wrote to me from prison. I thought you should see them." I hesitated, then took the envelope. "What do they say?" "He still believes he was right. He's convinced that you manipulated the jury, that Sarah was brainwashed by your lawyer. He talks about what he's going to do when he gets out." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of things?" "He wants to move back here, fight for custody of the children. He says he's going to prove that Sarah is an unfit mother for choosing you over him. Thomas, I think he's planning something." That evening, after Patricia left and Emma was asleep in her old room, I called Helena. She listened quietly as I told her about the visit and Fred's letters. "I'll contact the prosecutor's office," she said. "If Fred is making threats from prison, that could affect his parole eligibility. In the meantime, I think we should discuss getting a restraining order for you, Sarah, and the children." The legal protection gave us some peace of mind, but we all knew that a piece of paper wouldn't stop someone like Fred if he was truly determined to cause more damage. Despite the lingering threat, life slowly found its new normal. Sarah thrived in her independence, taking a promotion at work and enrolling in evening classes to finish the master's degree she had abandoned when she married Fred. The children adjusted to their new routine, spending 3 days a week with me and seeming happier and more relaxed than they had been in years. On a warm evening in late summer, almost a year after my vindication, I sat on my back porch watching Emma and Michael chase fireflies in the yard. Sarah sat beside me, reading a book for one of her graduate classes. "Dad," she said suddenly, looking up from her textbook, "do you ever regret fighting back?" Part of me wonders if it would have been easier to just plead guilty and serve a short sentence rather than put us all through the trial. I considered her question carefully. 6 months ago, I might have said yes. The fight nearly destroyed me. But look at them, I gestured toward the children, who were giggling as they tried to catch the glowing insects. If I had given up, they would have grown up believing their grandfather was a monster. They would have carried that shame and confusion forever. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. And Fred would have gotten away with it. He might have done the same thing to another family. Exactly. Sometimes fighting back isn't about winning or losing. It's about refusing to let evil people control the narrative. As darkness fell and we called the children inside, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible night when Fred had shattered our family with his lies. We were different people now, stronger in some ways, more cautious in others. We had learned that family bonds could survive even the most devastating attacks, but only if they were based on truth and genuine love. The scars would always be there. I would never again take for granted the simple joy of reading a bedtime story to my grandchildren or helping them with their homework. Every moment of normalcy felt precious because I knew how quickly it could be taken away. But we had survived. More than that, we had emerged from the darkness with our integrity intact and our love for each other stronger than ever. Fred could keep his hatred and his delusions. We had something far more powerful, the truth, and a family rebuilt on the foundation of that truth. As I tucked Emma and Michael into their beds that night, listening to their sleepy chatter about fireflies and swing sets, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, and that was enough. That was everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.